It's finally time for another FNAF Animatronics as Dragons episode. See, I really liked how the last episode a few months back turned out, but I didn't really have any good ideas for a FNAF-fueled sequel to it. Until recently, when I was conveniently rewatching the trailer for Security Breach. Now at the time I'm making this, the game isn't out yet, it comes out at the end of this week, so there is a limited amount of knowledge we actually currently have about what's going to happen in that game, but the lore that has been put out there and the speculation that fans have been having all gave me some really good ideas for a new FNAF Dragons episode. And the idea I had meant I could specifically use characters from the new upcoming game. I think you all are going to really like the story and the art in this one, so let's get into it, shall we? Let's go. Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. For 4 months, I'd had a recurring nightmare. The souls of terrified children screaming for my help from within decaying, horrific monstrosities that descended upon me from every direction. I often knew it was a dream, but it was horrifying all the same, as I was painfully aware that those same creatures haunting my nightmares did indeed exist in the real world. For me to finally sleep soundly and save the tormented souls of those children, I feared I had to do something I dreaded the thought of for months. I had to return to the Fbia kingdom. On my way there, I'd planned to stop at the Kingdom of Emil, the shoreline safe haven Henrik Emil had created after he and many others had finally fled from the island kingdom of Fbia, after many started to see the terror being brought upon them by the cursed dragons of King Willis Aftirian, those same very beasts that they'd been told were made to protect them. But when I arrived at the spot I knew Emil's kingdom to be, something else was in its place. The kingdom walls were still there, but all the surrounding homes and camps were gone. Cheery, excited people bustled in and out of the castle grounds through the main gates, upon which read a sign that seemed designed to be pleasant, but shot a chill down my spine. Welcome to New Fbia. I wandered inside and saw vendors selling their goods and people sprawled about enjoying food and games. It didn't seem like anyone lived here, but more so like a place people came to enjoy the day. Everyone seemed happy to be there, and many parents were there with their young children, which is what initially had been concerning me most. That is, until a loud roar bellowed from the nearby shore. My hand shot down to the hilt of my blade, but everyone around me exploded in cheers. I watched with my whole body tensed as a dragon burst from the water and soared over the kingdom wall. It was a smiley alligator beast that twirled through the air, spraying a mist of water over the onlookers. People cleared a space for it to land, and all the children rushed towards it. I wanted to stop them, but what could I do or say? Everything here seemed perfectly fine, and if I didn't know anything about the Fbia kingdom or the horrors of its creatures, I'd have thought all was well too. I tried using my abilities as the overseer of my world to look into this creature's body for any sign of captured souls that shouldn't have been there, like the beasts of the Fbia kingdom had possessed, taken from their helpless victims. But something was keeping me from seeing into this creature. I could see inside the bodies of all the civilians around me, but not this beast. Was this the work of King Aftirian's sorcery? Was he somehow back? My heart thudded as in the distance I heard the sound of another creature from a farther part of the castle. I wandered through the vast kingdom grounds, finding many seemingly pleasant monsters running around and playing with the children. There was a drake that had the head of a sun, and a purple zburator with flowing hair that extended like a second tail from its head. The more I saw, the more I prayed it was the last I'd see. After wandering the grounds for an hour, I finally spotted someone that may be able to answer any of my many questions. It was a woman in full guard attire who was pacing around keeping an eye on the goings-on. I marched up to her and asked her what was going on here, what had happened to the Kingdom of Emil, and where had these creatures come from. She could tell I was flustered, but responded calmly, first introducing herself as Vaness, New Fbia's guard. She had no idea what I meant by the Kingdom of Emil. She'd worked on these grounds for 2 months, having been hired away from her previous kingdom for a significant sum of gold. She'd been instructed to arrive near the day's end, ensure all the vendors and people left by sundown, and close the gates at night. She'd never met her employer in person, but was always promptly paid by couriers. It alarmed me that she was the only guard hired, responsible to ensure everyone was out of these massively vast grounds by the day's end. But then again, part of me suspected that whoever was running this place didn't really want everyone out before Vanis shut the gates. I followed along with Vanis as she marched around with a gong, ushering people to the exits at the day's end. I quietly told her all I knew about the last Fbia kingdom, and about the peaceful people who had resided here just 4 months ago. She was skeptical but clearly sensed some truth in what I was saying. She said that a few parents had claimed their children had gone missing on the grounds and never turned up, but eventually she stopped hearing from those parents. She assumed they'd found their children elsewhere, but she'd never been certain. There had also been one creature that had started getting a little too aggressive, a glamorous bird dragon, but the day after it started acting up, it had disappeared. Vanis assumed the owners of the castle had dealt with it. She'd also never stayed inside the kingdom walls at night. She simply closed up and marched around the outside of the grounds. But that night, she and I would both stay inside. As night fell, it appeared that we and the creatures that were hidden somewhere inside were the only beings left. Oddly, Vanis had started to close the gates with us inside, and I stopped her, saying we may need a fast way out. Hesitantly, she let the gates remain open, but that didn't last long. As we were only a few meters inside the walls, the purple wolf dragon crashed down between us and the open gate. It still wore a smile, but it was far from the pleasant one it had had earlier. Its eyes were wide, and green slime dripped from its maw. Its grin twitched as one of its eyes fluttered open and shut. Everything about this creature churned my insides, and that was even before it slashed its tail at the chain that held up the gate, destroying it and sending the barrier crashing down. I drew my blade and for the first time noticed that Vanis had no weapon. I should have seen that before. As the creature slowly marched forth, I decided this had been ill-planned on my part. I raised my arm to use my abilities to teleport us out of there, but just before doing so, we heard a call from farther inside the castle walls. It was the voice of a small child, saying, "I want to go home, help!" The creature before us suddenly looked past us, then burst into the air, soaring over our heads. It vanished into another part of the castle grounds, headed straight towards the call. Instinctively, I started to run after it, assuming Vanis was running along behind me. My mind raced. How many children had already been lost to this place? How many souls had been taken because I'd been too cowardly to come here sooner? I was just about to race around a corner when I glanced back and noticed Vanis was gone. I stopped and looked in every direction, but nobody was in sight, save for a small white rabbit that hopped along the grass. I called for Vanis quietly, then a bit louder. There was no response. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me and whipped around, then looked up. What I saw wasn't Vanis or the purple creature, but this beast seemed much more interested in me than hunting down the child. Perched on the edge of the castle wall was the sun-headed drake, with the same eerie grin that seemed a signature of all these creatures. It made a guttural, choking sound that slowly changed into a call like a laugh. I didn't have time for this. I needed to find the child and Vanis and get out. I took a step towards where the child's cry had come from, and the creature let out a shriek and started clawing at its own face. It began pulling flesh from the left side of its head as it leaned back and back and back until it fell over the castle wall out of sight. I heard its body thudding around as though it were having a seizure. Then everything stopped. I wanted to run, but part of me, the inquisitive Beast Chronicler part, forced me to stay and see what had just happened. It was a terrible instinct. A paw lunged over the wall and gripped the top. It crawled over slowly. The creature was similar in shape to how it had appeared a moment ago, but now it had a black and white and purple hide. Its face had become half-scarred black, and its eyes shone red. Any hints of positivity had vanished from its grin, which now exuded pure evil. As it finished its crawl over the wall, it stopped for a brief moment, tilted its head at me, then sprinted towards me on all fours. Before I could consciously decide to run or fight, my body decided for me. I ran straight towards a castle tower with a door too small for the creature to fit through. I didn't make it. The beast's massive paw swatted at my side and slammed me into a wall, rattling my entire body. It moved between me and the door, so I ran the other way. Another paw swiped just behind me but missed as I turned a corner. Right next to me was a hall into the castle. I skidded through dirt and sprinted in. The creature just barely fit through this hall and banged through walls as it chased me down. Barely lit by a torch ahead, I could see a smaller doorway coming up, and I picked up pace as much as I could. A paw slammed against my back, trying to grab me. Instead, it thrust me forward right into the doorway, and I rolled to a stop. The arm of the beast reached in to grab me, but came just short of snatching my leg as its shoulder caught in the doorway. I scrambled backwards until I was against the farthest stone wall. The creature thrashed around trying to get in, but eventually pulled its arm back and just stared a glowing red eye in, as if waiting for me to emerge. I looked around for the faint source of light in the room. It was a flickering torch spilling in from the next room, and it seemed to be moving. Not just moving, but moving away. The room got darker and darker, so I followed the light. I stepped cautiously into an open hall, and a small figure ran with a torch a ways ahead. I tried to call after, saying I was there to help, but I couldn't blame them for not stopping. If that was the trapped child, I imagined they were terrified. I kept running and made ground on them, but not before they bent around a corner and burst out of the tower into a clearing. They suddenly stopped and looked straight up. I got closer and closer to recognize the figure as a young boy, but before I could reach him, there was a bellowing shriek from above. The boy screamed, though barely audibly, over the sound of a decaying beast, whose claw thrust down from the sky, snatched him up, and shot back into the air. I ran into the clearing to see a pink, near-zombified wyvern with a shattered mouth carrying the boy up and tossing him on top of the tallest tower. He cried and cried for help as the creature landed down next to him and slowly lowered its head. I grabbed a rock off the ground and hurled it with all my might at the dragon. It barely reached and just thudded against the creature's leg, but it got the beast's attention. The monster turned from the boy and swooped down to the ground before me. I didn't know how much good my blade could do against it, but at least it was away from the boy. I tried to lure it farther and farther from him as I tried to plan. My teleportation was slow and not precise enough to get up to him, and if I left to save my own life, it was possible I couldn't even get myself back in here easily. The creature swung its wing at me and I leapt over, rolling across it and landing back on the ground just in time for its tail to smack against me, slamming me back to the ground. I tried to leap up, but a foot stomped down and pinned me. Its decaying head slowly lowered towards me, with blood dripping from its maw. It got within an inch of my face and breathed a nauseous puff of air at me. I thrashed to wiggle my arms free, but nothing worked. But just as it opened its maw to devour me, I noticed, once again, a white rabbit hopping along the clearing. It briefly caught the dragon's attention too, before an arrow shot through the air and impaled right into the monster's eye. It let out a blood-churning shriek and whipped its head up with its free eye to see Vanis atop the tower with the boy, wielding a crossbow, on which she was loading another shot. The creature shot off the ground, and just in time, I leapt up and grabbed hold of its tail. It soared up above the tower and I sprang off, just barely catching the ledge and clambering onto the tower next to them. Vanis stood between the boy and the beast and fired another bolt, this one piercing the side of the creature's neck. It shrieked again and swung its tail at us all. Vanis tackled the boy to the ground, and I barely ducked under as well as the strike smashed stones free from the tower that went careening to the ground below. My eyes followed them to see the other monsters all crawling their way towards us. There was no winning this fight, at least not today. I tapped the runes on my forearm to start opening a portal as Vanis loaded another shot into her bow. Just before I could complete the process, the creature's claw thrust down. Vanis shoved me aside and the creature grabbed her instead, then soared up. Her crossbow fell from her hands, but I wasn't close enough to catch it. Luckily, the boy reached his arm over the castle wall and snatched the weapon himself. He clumsily but quickly aimed it up and fired right at the creature's foot. The arrow was just off course, but Vanice thrust her arm out and caught it out of the air. She slammed the arrow into the toe of the creature, and it released its grip. She fell nearly 20 feet and was going to miss the tower. As fast as I could, I snatched up the boy and leapt over the side of the wall with him. We free fell with Vanice as I finished tapping the runes on my forearms to make a portal. Just before we could hit the earth, the portal opened and we flew through it, changing directions from shooting towards the earth to rolling along it, bouncing across a dirt floor in a forest far away. With a dwindling call from one of the beasts, the portal closed behind us. We all panted and lay on the ground in pain and exhaustion. We'd solved next to nothing, and now, instead of having gotten answers, I only had more questions about the apparently expanding Fazbian kingdom. But at least we'd all gotten out of there alive. Well, I really like how this one turned out. I think it was even better than the first episode, both art and story-wise. Definitely open to the possibility of doing another round of this, but if you've got other ideas for things I could do with FNAF animatronics or characters, or other stuff I could turn into dragons or monsters, give me all those ideas in the comments below. I only started working with FNAF because of people suggesting it so much in the comments. And of course, if you are new to the channel, you can check out some of my other FNAF-focused episodes. As I said, there's a first episode in this series turning FNAF animatronics into dragons. And a couple months back, I did a mix of Friday Night Funkin' with Five Nights at Freddy's. And lots of people have been wanting me to do a sequel to that episode as well, but I don't have a good idea for the story. Yet, at least. Besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or uplifting note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is just to encourage you to think about something that you have in your life right now that a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago would have seemed like a miracle to you then. It can be something as big as your significant other, or as small as even just a video game system or something. But something that you really, really wanted and now you have. It's really easy to slowly stop being grateful for something that we have now that we used to really, really want. So just think about something that you have right now that you didn't have in the past that you are incredibly appreciative of. I hope that was uplifting to someone out there. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. I love you and goodbye.